Broadway is a machine built on illusions, but it is also a beast that devours weakness. In the high-stakes world of New York theater, appearance is often currency, and talent is secondary to looks. We have all heard the stories of difficult directors and brutal casting calls, but rarely do we witness a moment of justice so pure that it shakes the foundation of the industry. In the winter of 2024, a legendary director named Julian Blackwood decided that his new production of The Empress of the Sun needed a statue, not a singer. He cast a tall, imposing lead and relegated a petite Filipino powerhouse named Amara simply because she didn't meet his height requirement. He told her she was invisible. He told her she would never command a stage. He was wrong. This is the story of how the too short understudy didn't just step into the spotlight, she blinded everyone with it. The majestic theater on 44th Street was freezing in January, a cavern of red velvet and gold leaf that smelled of dust and anxiety. At the center of this cold kingdom sat Julian Blackwood, a director whose reputation for brilliance was only matched by his reputation for cruelty. He was casting The Empress of the Sun, a musical revival that required a lead actress who could dominate the room merely by walking into it. Julian was obsessed with optics. He believed that power was a physical attribute, measured in inches and bone structure. When Amara, a young woman from the Philippines who had spent her life savings just to get to New York, walked onto that stage for her audition, Julian didn't even look up from his notes. To him, she was already disqualified. She stood barely 5 feet tall, a stark contrast to the towering chorus girls behind her. In Julian's mind, the Empress had to be a giant, and Amara was simply too small to matter in his grand vision. Despite the director's immediate dismissal, Amara began to sing. It was a ballad called The Heavy Crown, a song that demanded a vocal range that had broken lesser performers. As the first note left her lips, the chatter in the casting booth ceased instantly. Her voice was not just loud, it was textured with a sorrow and a resilience that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards of the theater. It was the kind of voice that sounded like it had traveled thousands of miles and carried the weight of generations. For 3 minutes, she was 10 feet tall. When she finished, there was a deafening silence. The casting director, a woman named Sarah, looked at Julian with wide eyes, expecting him to offer the role on the spot. Instead, Julian sighed, took off his glasses, and delivered a line that would haunt the production for months. The voice is a miracle, darling. But look at you. The audience needs a queen, not a lady-in-waiting. You're just too short. You disappear behind the scenery. The role of the Empress went to Veronica St. Clair, a stunning, statuesque actress who looked exactly like the drawings in Julian's sketchbook. Veronica was 6 feet tall in heels, with a jawline that could cut glass and a resume filled with safe, technically proficient performances. She was the safe bet, the visual centerpiece Julian wanted. However, the producers, recognizing the undeniable power of Amara's audition, forced Julian's hand. They insisted Amara be hired as the understudy. Julian agreed only begrudgingly, making it clear that Amara was there as an insurance policy he never intended to cash. He told the stage manager, loud enough for Amara to hear, "Keep the little one in the back during rehearsals. I don't want her cluttering the blocking." It was a humiliation meant to break her spirit, to remind her that in his theater, she was lesser. But Amara, raised on the stories of her grandmother in Manila who survived the war, simply nodded, took her script, and sat in the shadows. Rehearsals for The Empress of the Sun were brutal. Julian was a perfectionist who drove his cast to the brink of exhaustion. He focused entirely on Veronica, sculpting her every movement to maximize her height and presence. He designed the set with massive, towering pillars and a throne that sat atop a steep staircase, visuals designed to make the Empress look godlike. Amara watched it all from a folding chair in the wings. While Veronica struggled to connect emotionally with the character's tragic history, Amara was mentally dissecting every scene. She wasn't just memorizing lines, she was internalizing the soul of the show. Every time Veronica missed a beat or failed to hit the emotional climax of a song, Julian would scream, bigger. Be bigger. He was trying to direct emotion through size, unaware that the petite Filipino woman taking furious notes in the corner already understood that true bigness comes from the heart, not the height. As the weeks turned into months, a quiet tension began to build within the cast. The ensemble dancers and the crew loved Amara. She was the one who brought homemade pandesal to the morning calls and stayed late to help the wardrobe mistress sew buttons. She carried a warmth that was distinctly Filipino, a hospitality that disarmed the cynical New York theater veterans. In contrast, Veronica was becoming increasingly isolated, buckling under the pressure of Julian's impossible standards. The director's obsession with the look was backfiring. Veronica looked the part, but she felt hollow. During the Sitzprobe, where the cast sang with the orchestra for the first time, Veronica's voice cracked on the high C. It was a small fracture, but it signaled a deeper problem. Julian dismissed it as fatigue, refusing to acknowledge that his perfect visual star lacked the vocal stamina for the role. Amara noticed it, too, but she remained silent, continuing her private rehearsals in the basement of her small apartment in Queens. The technical rehearsals, Tech Week, are known in Broadway as the Week from Hell, and this production was no exception. The massive set pieces were dangerous and difficult to maneuver. Julian had blocked the show so that the lead actress had to constantly navigate stairs and platforms without looking down, to maintain an air of arrogance. During a dress rehearsal, Julian finally turned his attention to Amara for the first time in weeks. He needed to check the lighting for the understudy, just in case. He made Amara stand on the center mark. Good Lord, he sneered over the fiercely bright spotlight. We're going to have to re-angle the lights. She's so small she's living in the shadows of the ensemble. Amara, try to stand on your toes or something. You look like a child lost in a museum. The cast winced at the cruelty. Amara didn't flinch. She stood her ground, looked directly into the blinding light, and said, I don't need to be tall to be seen, sir. I just need to be heard. Julian laughed off her comment, but it planted a seed of irritation in him. He hated being challenged, especially by someone he considered visually inadequate for his masterpiece. He doubled down on Veronica, pushing her harder. You are the Empress. He would shout. You must loom over them. But the stress was taking a physical toll on the lead. Veronica began to develop a slight limp, a result of the towering heels and the steep raked stage. She was popping painkillers to get through the run-throughs. The producers were getting nervous. They whispered in the back of the auditorium, glancing at the empty understudy chair where Amara usually sat. They knew the show relied entirely on the presence of the Empress. If Veronica went down, they were left with the director's rejected option. Julian assured them Veronica is a tank. She'll be fine. And even if she isn't, I'll just have to block the show around the little one so no one notices her lack of stature. 2 days before opening night, disaster struck. It wasn't a dramatic fall or a sudden illness, but a simple twist of fate. During the final dress rehearsal, while descending the grand staircase in the Act II finale, Veronica's heel caught on the hem of her heavy velvet cape. She tumbled down 4 steps. The sound of her ankle snapping was sickeningly loud in the silent theater. The rehearsal stopped instantly. Medics rushed the stage. Julian stood frozen in the aisle, his face draining of color. His vision, his perfect, tall Empress, was being carried off on a stretcher. The diagnosis came back an hour later, a severe fracture. Veronica was out for at least 6 weeks. The production was in chaos. The investors were panicking. Opening night was 48 hours away, and the show had no lead. Julian had to make the call he never wanted to make. He had to call Amara. Amara was at a laundromat in Queens when her phone rang. It was the stage manager, his voice trembling. Get to the theater. Now. You're going on. When Amara arrived, the atmosphere was funereal. The cast looked terrified, the producers looked like they were preparing for a lawsuit. Julian was pacing the stage like a caged tiger. He didn't greet Amara with encouragement. He greeted her with panic. "Listen to me," he barked, grabbing her shoulders. "We have to change everything. You can't wear Veronica's costumes, you'll drown in them. We have to cut the blocking on the stairs because you won't look imposing enough. I'm going to have the spotlight tighten on you so people don't see how much empty space is around you." He was dismantling the show to hide her. He was trying to minimize her presence before she even sang a note. Amara pulled away from him gently but firmly. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice steady. "Don't change the blocking. Just fix the hem." The audacity of the request stunned him. She was asking to perform the show exactly as it was designed for a woman a foot taller than her. "You are absurd," Julian scoffed. "You cannot command that staircase. You are a chaotic variable in a precision machine." But the wardrobe mistress, a tough woman named Elena who had taken a liking to Amara, stepped in. "I can hem the dress in 4 hours, Julian. Let the girl do the work." With no time to reblock the entire show, Julian threw his hands up in defeat. "Fine. Fail. Go out there and look like a dwarf in a giant's castle. But don't say I didn't warn you when the critics laugh." The next 24 hours were a blur of fittings and rapid-fire music rehearsals. Amara didn't sleep. She spent the night in the theater, walking the stage alone, measuring the distance between the pillars, figuring out how to occupy the space not with her body, but with her energy. She channeled every struggle she had faced as an immigrant, every rejection, every no, into the character of the Empress. Opening night arrived with the force of a hurricane. The majestic theater was packed to the rafters. Critics from the New York Times, Variety, and the Post were in the audience, notebooks ready. The playbills had a slip of white paper inserted. "At this performance, the role of the Empress will be played by Amara De La Cruz." A ripple of disappointment went through the crowd. They had paid to see the statuesque Veronica St. Clair, not an unknown understudy. Backstage, the air was thick with nausea. Julian was in the sound booth, head in his hands, already drafting his apology letter to the investors. He couldn't bear to watch. He kept muttering, "She's too small. She's going to ruin the tableau." Amara stood in the wings, dressed in the heavy gold robes that had been pinned and tucked to fit her small frame. She closed her eyes, whispered a prayer in Tagalog, and waited for her cue. The overture began, a thunderous roll of drums. The curtain rose on the first scene, the coronation. The blocking required the Empress to stand at the very top of the 20-foot staircase, back to the audience, before turning slowly to face her subjects. It was the moment Julian feared most, the moment where Amara's height would be most obvious against the massive set. The music swelled. Amara turned. She didn't just turn, she whipped around with a ferocity that sent the heavy velvet cape flying like a storm cloud. She stood at the top of the stairs, chin raised, eyes blazing with a fire that reached the back row of the balcony. She didn't look small. She looked concentrated. Like a diamond is smaller than a rock but holds more light, Amara held the focus of the entire room. She took her first step down, not tentatively, but with a rhythmic, predatory grace. The audience, prepared to be underwhelmed, leaned forward. Julian, peeking through his fingers in the booth, stopped breathing. Then came the voice. The first song, Kneel Before the Sun, was a command. When Veronica sang it, it was a request for attention. When Amara sang it, it was a decree. Her voice exploded out of her small frame, filling every corner of the theater, bouncing off the gold leaf, and vibrating in the chests of the audience. It was a rich, dark, powerful belt that defied physics. How could such a sound come from such a small person? She descended the stairs while sustaining a high belt, her eyes locking with the actors below her. The ensemble didn't have to act terrified, they genuinely looked awestruck. The chemistry on stage shifted immediately. Because Amara was physically smaller, the other actors had to lean in to hear her, to engage with her, which created an intensity and intimacy that the production had lacked. She wasn't looming over them, she was the gravitational center pulling them in. By the end of the first act, the audience was mesmerized. The height issue that Julian had obsessed over had vanished. In fact, her stature became her strength. When the tall, imposing male lead, the general, tried to intimidate her character, Amara didn't back down. She walked right up to his chest, looked up with a terrifying calmness, and delivered her lines with a quiet menace that made the 6'2" actor look weak. It was a visual metaphor that the audience devoured. True power doesn't need to shout, and it doesn't need to be tall. It just needs to be absolute. In the intermission, the lobby was buzzing. No one was talking about the set. No one was talking about the lighting. They were talking about the Filipino girl with the volcano in her throat. Julian wandered the lobby like a ghost, overhearing the praise, his worldview slowly cracking. Act 2 contained the show's emotional climax, the ballad The Heavy Crown that she had auditioned with. This was the scene where the Empress breaks down, stripping off her armor to reveal her vulnerability. Julian had directed Veronica to weep elegantly on the chaise lounge. Amara changed it. In the heat of the moment, she dropped to her knees center stage. It was a risky move, it made her even smaller. But as the spotlight narrowed to a single beam on her kneeling form, the effect was devastating. She looked like a child and an ancient spirit all at once. She sang of loss, of the pressure to be strong, of the loneliness of leadership. Tears streamed down her face, real tears born of years of being overlooked. The silence in the theater was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Then, as she hit the final, soft note, a woman in the front row audibly sobbed. The final scenes were a blur of triumph. Amara navigated the complex blocking with a fluidity that Veronica never possessed. She didn't just walk through the set, she owned it. She moved with the efficiency of a dancer, making the massive pillars seem like they were there to protect her, not dwarf her. When the finale arrived, and the Empress reclaims her throne, Amara marched up the stairs. This time, she didn't look like a pretender. She looked like she had conquered the mountain. She sat on the throne, her feet barely touching the ground, but her posture was so regal, so expanding, that she filled the entire proscenium arch. The lights faded to black on her silhouette, arm raised in victory. There was a pause of 2 seconds in the darkness, the god pause, before the audience erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a roar. The entire audience of 1,600 people surged to their feet before the lights even came back up. It was a primal reaction to witnessing greatness. When the curtain call began, the ensemble bowed, then the supporting leads. Finally, the stage cleared for Amara. She walked out from the wings, still in her heavy robes, looking tiny again without the character's armor. She bowed low, her face wet with tears. The noise was deafening. "Brava! Brava!" echoed from the balcony. Flowers were thrown onto the stage. Amara picked up a bouquet, looked up at the blinding lights, and smiled, a genuine, shocked smile of a girl who had been told she wasn't enough. In the wings, Julian Blackwood stood with his arms crossed, watching the mayhem he had tried to prevent. Julian walked onto the stage to join the cast, as is customary for opening night. Usually, he would bask in the applause, taking credit for his vision. But as he stood next to Amara, the applause grew louder, directed clearly at her. He looked down at her. She looked up, her eyes bright and defiant. In that moment, the great director felt very, very small. He realized that his obsession with physical perfection had almost cost him the greatest performance of his career. He leaned down, and for the first time, spoke to her with respect. "You didn't disappear," he whispered, his voice caught by the microphone just enough for the front row to hear. "You ate the scenery alive." It was the closest thing to an apology he was capable of giving. Amara just nodded and squeezed his hand, a gesture of forgiveness he didn't deserve. The reviews the next morning were cataclysmic. The New York Times headline read, "The Empress has arrived, how a too short understudy became a giant." The reviews savagely critiqued Julian's direction as stiff and archaic but hailed Amara as a revelation, a force of nature that redefines what a leading lady looks like. Another critic wrote, "Miss De La Cruz proves that stage presence is not measured in inches, but in voltage. She is the brightest light on Broadway." The narrative of the Filipino understudy went viral. YouTube videos comparing her voice to legendary divas racked up millions of views. The show, which had been tracking for lukewarm sales, sold out for the next 6 months in a matter of hours. Everyone wanted to see the little woman with the big voice. Veronica St. Clair eventually recovered from her injury, but she never reclaimed the role. The producers knew they couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. They bought out Veronica's contract, a rare and expensive move, and officially offered the lead to Amara. The promotional posters outside the theater were changed. The image of the tall, faceless silhouette was replaced by a close-up of Amara's face, fierce and beautiful. It was a victory not just for her, but for every actor who had been told they were too short, too dark, too wide, or too different to lead. Amara became a symbol of meritocracy in an industry built on nepotism and aesthetics. She used her newfound platform to advocate for more diverse casting, specifically pushing for more Filipino representation in American theater. However, the victory didn't come without new challenges. With fame came scrutiny. Julian, though outwardly supportive now that the show was a hit, struggled with his ego. He couldn't handle that his discovery was accidental. During the second month of the run, he tried to tweak Amara's performance, trying to rein her in, to make her more disciplined. He gave her notes to hold back on the emotional intensity of the second act, claiming it was too melodramatic. Amara, now confident in her connection with the audience, pushed back. "The audience cries because I give them everything, Julian," she told him during a heated notes session. "I am Filipino. We wear our hearts on our sleeves. I will not sanitize my performance to make you feel comfortable." It was a bold stance, but she knew she had the leverage now. The box office receipts were her armor. One evening, a group of young Filipino theater students waited by the stage door. It was snowing, a bitter New York winter night. When Amara came out, wrapped in a thick scarf, they screamed. They didn't just want autographs, they wanted to tell her what she meant to them. One girl, crying, told Amara, "I quit acting school because my teacher told me I had a chorus face and was too short for leads. Seeing you up there. I'm going back tomorrow." Amara stopped, ignoring her security guard who tried to usher her into the waiting car. She stood in the snow and spoke to the girl for 10 minutes. She told them about Julian's comments, about the rejection, about the fear. "They will tell you no 1,000 times, Amara said, her breath visible in the cold air. "But they only need to say yes once. And sometimes, you have to force them to say it." The climax of Amara's run came during the Tony Awards season. The Empress of the Sun was nominated for 12 awards, including Best Musical and Best Direction for Julian. But the most buzzed about nomination was Best Leading Actress in a Musical for Amara De La Cruz. She was up against industry veterans, women with decades of experience and movie star fame. On the night of the ceremony, Radio City Music Hall was glittering. Julian sat next to Amara, looking nervous. He needed this win for his legacy. Amara sat quietly, wearing a gown designed by a Filipino designer, a nod to her roots. When the category was announced, the presenter paused for dramatic effect. "And the Tony goes to Amara De La Cruz." The room exploded. It was the culmination of an impossible journey. Amara walked to the podium, clutching the silver trophy. She had to lower the microphone significantly, a moment that drew a warm laugh from the crowd. She looked out at the sea of faces, the producers, the directors, the tall, statuesque leading ladies. She took a breath. When I auditioned for this role, she began, I was told I was too short to be a queen. I was told I would disappear. The camera panned to Julian, who looked uncomfortable but clapped stoically. But I come from a country of islands that face typhoons every year and still stand. I come from a family that taught me that stature is what you do when you are knocked down. This award is for every understudy waiting in the wings. It is for everyone who has been measured and found wanting. Your height doesn't matter. Your heart does. The speech became iconic. It cemented Amara's place not just as a star, but as a leader. Back at the theater, the dynamic had permanently shifted. Julian Blackwood, the tyrant of Broadway, had been humbled by the girl he tried to hide. He began to change his casting processes. He started looking at actors he would have previously ignored. It was a slow change, but it was there. He even cast a deaf actor in a subsequent play, a move he credited to Amara opening his mind to different kinds of presence. The Amara effect rippled through Broadway. Casting calls began to include phrases like all body types encouraged more frequently. The rigid archetypes of the golden age were beginning to crack, all because one director's bias collided with one woman's undeniable talent. Amara played the role of the Empress for a year. She never missed a show. She performed through flu, through exhaustion, through personal heartbreak. She treated the role with a sacred respect, knowing how easily it could have been taken away. Her final performance was an event. People flew in from Manila, from London, from Tokyo. The energy in the theater was electric. During the final bow, Julian walked onto the stage, not to take a bow himself, but to hand her a single red rose. It was a breaking of character for the stoic director. He took the microphone and said simply, "I stand corrected." It was the only review Amara had ever really needed from him. After leaving the show, Amara didn't fade away. She released a solo album, starred in a musical film, and opened a scholarship fund for underprivileged Asian artists in New York. She proved that she wasn't a one-hit wonder or a novelty act. She was a legitimate star. But she never forgot the majestic theater. She would often visit the stage door, talking to the new cast members, encouraging the ensemble. She remained the anti-diva, the star who remembered what it was like to be invisible. Her legacy wasn't just in the awards she won, but in the doors she kicked open for others. Years later, a documentary crew interviewed Julian Blackwood, now retired. They asked him about his long career, his many hits, his few failures. When they asked him about the Empress of the Sun, his face softened. "I made a mistake," he admitted to the camera. "I looked at Amara and I saw inches. I didn't see the mile she had traveled to get there. I thought theater was about painting a picture. She taught me that theater is about starting a fire. And my God, did she burn that stage down." It was a rare admission of fallibility from a man who built a career on being right. It served as a warning and a lesson to the next generation of directors: never underestimate the understudy. As for Amara, she eventually returned to the Philippines for a homecoming concert. The Araneta Coliseum was packed. When she walked out, she wasn't the small girl from the audition room. She was a national hero. She sang The Heavy Crown, and the audience sang every word back to her. It was a moment of pure connection, a validation that transcended borders and industries. She had proven that talent is the great equalizer. She had taken the insults, the doubts, and the literal and figurative obstacles, and used them as steps to climb to the top. The story of Amara De La Cruz is a reminder that the world will often try to define you by your limitations. They will tell you that you are too short, too poor, too old, or too foreign. They will try to put you in a box or hide you in the background. But just like that night at the Majestic Theater, when the lights go down and the spotlight hits, none of their definitions matter. All that matters is what you have inside you. Amara didn't outshine the lead because she grew taller, she outshined the lead because she refused to be small. And in the end, the director who wanted a giant got one, he just didn't recognize her until she started to sing.